Now, it's been 1 year since the release of the iPhone 14 Pro Max, and even though the iPhone 15 Pro Max is coming out very soon, I think that the 14 Pro Max is still worth it, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, the reason as to why I say that the 14 Pro Max is still worth buying is because as of September 14th, 2023, you can just simply go into the Apple Store and buy the iPhone 14 Pro Max for $1,000, which is an amazing deal since it's incredibly similar to the 15 Pro Max. And I know that some of you guys are giving me a major side eye because I still recommend the 14 Pro Max, but I think that with the right price, it's worth it in the long run. Because think about it like this, you'll still have iOS 17, you'll still have the dynamic island, you'll still have that 120 Hz refresh rate, and I don't think that USB-C or even 5x zoom is worth the $200 price increase. And if you're someone who just wants a top-of-the-line iPhone and you don't care about all the little updates that the 15 Pro Max has to offer, then the 14 Pro Max is the perfect fit. And I'm not someone who thinks that just because the iPhone 15 Pro Max is new, that it smiles better than iPhone 14 Pro Max, because in reality, it's only going to be a little bit better, and for everyone who wants to get a very identical phone for a good discount, I will be showing you how the iPhone 14 Pro Max holds up after 1 year of use. Now, looking at the battery, the iPhone 14 Pro Max handled everything very well, especially since I've been racking up as much screen time as I usually do. I've been testing out how long my 14 Pro Max lasts with low-medium usage, and during this period, I will be getting about 5 hours of on-screen time, and honestly, there wasn't a day where I had to check my phone to see if it would die. I never had to use power saving mode since the battery was able to last me all day with no problem, and as long as I got up to 6 hours of screen time, I could basically use any power-heavy app that I wanted. A majority of my time was used on social media, texting family and friends, watching YouTube videos, and occasionally playing games when I got bored. The Pro Max also supports 30-watt fast charging, which doesn't really sound great on paper, but it still works pretty good in real life. 75% in 55 minutes was enough for me, and I usually charge my phones overnight, so it really didn't matter that much. And also, speaking of usage, I was never the type of person to cut any corners to save battery, and my iPhone had all-day battery life, so most of the time, I was charging it overnight. And during my time of using the Pro Max, I had 5G on, my brightness was on manual and always medium to high with always on display on. I'm using every power heavy app as much as I can. And again, I only use power saving mode a handful of times, meaning that if you are someone who mostly charges your phone overnight, you should be good no matter how much you use your phone. And the last thing that I wanted to point out was that after 1 year, my battery health is at 90%, which is pretty good, I guess. I remember my 12 Pro went down to like 85 in a year, which was pretty bad. So 90%, it's okay. And so now that we've taken a look at battery, let's get into the more physical aspect of the phone, and that's design and build quality. And now when it comes to iPhones, I feel like they've always had the best feeling phones when it comes to quality. They have this very heavy premium feel that not many others can replicate. The 14 Pro Max has this very rounded frame, but when you hold it, it's very boxy. The phone's frame fits in my hand very well. I'm holding my phone for hours on a day-to-day basis, so its heaviness and heavy corners basically balance each other out. Also, the rounded frame makes it much easier to hold since it was still able to fit into my hand very well, and I'm very glad that they used a boxy frame despite having rounded corners. Now, the 14 Pro Max also has a pretty nice weight to it. It weighs 240 grams, which is a tiny bit heavier than my S23 Ultra. And me personally, I like when my phones have a good heavy weight to them. It really adds to its premium feel and makes me feel like I'm actually carrying around a $1,000 phone. And now when it comes to aesthetics, the Pro Max has really mastered that Apple clean yet simple type of style. It's very similar to the older iPhones, which is great since it always works. And the design is very minimalistic, which doesn't hurt its buying factor. And even using it with the case, the iPhone has always had really great cases that become the true identity of your iPhone. So you really can't go wrong with either. And now looking at the display, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has a 6.7-inch Super Retina XDR display that is definitely one of the best in the game still. The pill-shaped notch isn't the greatest in terms of spacing, but when watching videos, I got really used to it and I found it to not get in my way as much. Everything on the display felt very sleek, and I think that the 14 Pro Max mastered the balance between sharpness, smoothness, and the feeling of quality. And as far as durability, the Pro Max has ceramic shield on the display, which I'm not gonna lie is pretty terrible when it comes to scratch resistance. I remember there was a time where I dropped it literally from my couch to the floor and it had this very nasty scratch, and I basically had to use Apple Care to replace the whole thing because iPhone 14 Pro Max's screens are very expensive. And I will recommend you guys to get a screen protector because again, you will regret it if you don't. But besides its shaky durability, it's very sharp, punchy, and premium when it comes to colors. The brightness is amazing. If you're outside with the 14 Pro Max, it can reach up to 2000 nits of peak brightness. And I got to test this out because there are many extremely sunny days where I live at, and I didn't really feel the need to max it out since the brightness was so good. Now, arguably, my favorite thing about the display was the 120 Hz refresh rate that Apple calls ProMotion. It complemented iOS so well, and I was very surprised that it was able to be very fast and smooth at the same time. Watching movies and content on this phone is amazing. The dual speakers creates a great experience experience when it comes to sound, and the speakers are extremely loud with very good quality. Now, the last thing that I wanted to touch on when it comes to the display is the array of ways to unlock your phone. There aren't many, but Face ID works very well, so I can't complain. I use Face ID with my mask on at night, and there were so many different situations where the lighting wasn't the best or the environment wasn't the best, and Face ID worked flawlessly every single time. Now, moving on to Dynamic Island, it's something that many people who have the iPhone 14 Pro Max really don't care about, and based on my experience with it, I would say that you really do stop caring pretty fast. The only thing that I really use it for is music and sometimes the GPS, but all of its other functionalities like the timer or caller information can be clocked on my Apple Watch, which makes it even more meaningless. And I'm not saying that it's not cool. It is and can be helpful depending on the app or situation, but overall, I don't really think that it lived up to its hype. But besides my opinions on the idea of Dynamic Island, it worked very well and I didn't get any hiccups with it, but be careful because there are some people out there who are still experiencing many bugs. Now, before I discuss camera, I want to go over some problems that I'm still dealing with in my 1 year of using the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, the first problem that I dealt with on my 14 Pro Max was a very personal problem that a lot of people who have multiple phones face, and that's the wireless SIM card problem. Now, as you guys know, I change between Androids and iPhones, so it's always nice to pop out my SIM card and put it into a new phone. But the problem is that for some reason, most phone companies aren't even equipped to make this process as smooth as possible. It takes way too long, I'll get a lot of failed tries, and it's just way more complicated than it needs to be. And now the last problem that I still face and was very annoyed with when it came to the iPhone 14 Pro Max was the camera focus. Now, I shoot a majority of my videos on my iPhone, but I stopped shooting with my 14 Pro Max since it still has yet to fix this annoying problem. Like whenever I'm shooting my phone, I try to show off the size, and for some reason, the 14 Pro Max literally can't focus on it. So I basically just end up putting it away and using my iPhone 12 Pro instead. Now, moving on to camera, the 14 Pro Max isn't a beast on the spec sheet, but still produces very high quality pictures. It has a 48 megapixel main camera with a 12 megapixel ultra wide and a 12 megapixel telephoto camera that is one of the best in my opinion. And something that I realized is that compared to all of the other phones that I've used over the past few years, the iPhone has always been the most realistic in terms of color. Like the colors are always toned down and you can tell that the photos aren't heavily processed. The Pro Max's zoom photos are very good as well. I've always found the ultra wide photos to be acceptable but not great, but as you zoom in more, the pictures add much more detail. Selfies on the 14 Pro Max were the best in the smartphone market. I love how it handles my skin tone. I love how it looks realistic while also adjusting little details, and I've pretty much always been a fan of iPhone selfies. Now, the videos on the 14 Pro Max were amazing despite the minor problem that I mentioned earlier. There were many things that caught my attention, but overall, the clean professionalism stood out the most. You can shoot videos up to 4K. It looks really good, and even though it takes up the most space, I think that the quality is so much worth it. Stabilization was solid, pans were smooth along with brightness and contrast, and the sharpening is still at its peak. And I want to give you guys some of my random footage that I was able to capture with my 14 Pro Max. And alright you guys, that's it for my review on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Again, it has gotten better since the first time it released, but I think that a lot of people can really capitalize off the amazing deal. And let me know down in the comments, you guys, would you buy the iPhone 14 Pro Max right now? Let me know. And again, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'm going to see you guys on the next one. Peace.